What's up, everyone? In today's video, I want to talk about how to prepare for a recession in your 20s. Now, look, if you've paid attention to the US economy recently, you know things are kind of going in the wrong direction in my opinion when it comes to the near-term future. The S&P is kind of steady if not down. There's a lot of economical and political things driving the economy a little bit downward, and if you pay attention to the job report, you know that unemployment rate is getting higher, and this is just the time where you turn on the news and everyone's going to tell you to start preparing for a recession, things are going bad, your future's over, right? So in this video, I kind of want to talk about, if you're in your 20s, the mindset that you should have when it comes to a recession or preparing for a recession. Now, quick disclaimer. Whenever people start talking about recessions, the conversation usually gets pretty dramatic, right? You're going to hear things, people are going to tell you to protect your assets, they're going to tell you to move to cash, or just get defensive with your money. And for some people, right, those conversations are definitely relevant, especially if you're close to retirement age or you're relying on your investments to actually give you income. But more than likely, if you're in your 20s, you're nowhere close to retirement, and you're probably not relying on your investments for actual income. You're relying on your job for that. So the reality is, it's usually a lot less dramatic than people make it sound. And most recessions historically don't last that long. The average recession in the United States lasts somewhere from around a year to 2 years at most, sometimes a little longer depending on the situation. And markets, they might take a little bit of time to fully recover, but all in all, when you zoom out over decades, downturns, due to recessions usually look like temporary dips because if we look at the S&P 500, it goes up in the upward trend, right? So if you're in your 20s and you're investing with a really long time horizon, for most people, the best strategy is often the most simple strategy, and that's just continue doing what already works for you. Keep investing consistently, keep dollar cost averaging into the stock market, and if you're someone who invests in broad market funds like the S&P 500, the reality is that downturns are often the exact periods where long-term investors, that's actually where you're going to build most of your wealth. Now, obviously, I'm not hoping for a recession, but truthfully, when you're in your 20s, that's the best time to actually take advantage of lower cost, broad market funds. So the main point I'm trying to make here in this little intro / disclaimer is, if you're young and you're investing for the long term, you usually don't need to make any dramatic changes every time people start worrying about the economy. You don't need to pull out of your investments. You don't need to do X, Y, and Z. Just keep dollar cost averaging and just turn the news off. That's what I would recommend. But once again, on the flip side, that does not mean recessions don't affect people in their 20s, right? That would be a very nonchalant mindset to have, because while long-term investors might be fine, recessions can still impact a lot of things, right? They can impact your job, your income stability, and give you more financial stress. So if you do want to prepare yourself a little bit better for an economic recession or a little bit of a downturn, there are a few practical things in your 20s that can make a big difference. So we'll get into that the rest of the video. But once again, disclaimer, if you got a long time horizon, more than likely you can turn the news off, relax, keep doing your thing. So I would say the first thing you need to do when preparing for a recession in your 20s is just know your numbers. And I've talked about this before, but the first thing that helps almost more than anything, and you can do literally right now while you're watching this video, is simply knowing your numbers. And a lot of people will go through their whole financial lives with a general sense of how things are going, but not a very clear picture. They know roughly what their paycheck is, they know their rent, they know their credit card bill shows up each month, but beyond that, they don't really know too much about their whole financial picture. And when the economy starts looking a little shaky, that lack of clarity in your finances can make a lot of things feel a lot more stressful than it needs to be. Because when you don't really know where your money's going, every financial question will suddenly start feeling bigger, and you start wondering things like, man, how long is my savings actually going to last if I lost my job, or whether you could realistically cut your spending if you have to. But once you actually take the time, you sit down, you look at your numbers, things become a lot clearer. And with, clearer picture of your finances, you gain more knowledge. Therefore, a lot of that uncertainty goes away. You start understanding exactly how much money is coming in each month. You know what your fixed expenses are, things like rent, insurance, loan payments. And you can also start seeing which part of your spending you could be a little bit more flexible, or you can adjust if necessary. And visibility does two things in my opinion. First, it helps you make better decisions because obviously you know where your money's going, but just as important, it's going to reduce stress during any type of recession or downturn because, let's be honest, when a lot of people start feeling distressed because they don't know what's going to happen with their money. But if you have a clear financial picture of exactly your numbers and where your money's going, boom, that financial anxiety usually goes away for the most part. So when you're preparing for a possible recession, that clarity of your finances and knowledge is super valuable, and you should definitely know your numbers. The next thing that is super important is building a financial buffer. This is what people are usually referring to when you hear people talk about an emergency fund, right? It's money that isn't invested in the market. It isn't tied up in anything complicated. You could easily deploy it or you could easily access it. It's simply cash that exists for the sole purpose of giving you breathing room if something unexpected were to happen. And when the economy is strong, this can feel very unnecessary, right? Like, why do I have all this extra cash lying around? I should deploy it, blah, blah, blah. But if your income is steady and everything seems stable, then it's easy to assume that things will just keep going up and everything's fine. And because of that, what happens is a lot of people prioritize investing every extra dollar they have while leaving very little cash available for emergencies. But recessions or economical downturns tend to remind people why true liquidity matters, right? If a company downsizes, if your hours get reduced, or if the job market, like it has, is slowing down, having a financial buffer completely changes how that situation feels to you. Because without savings, every unexpected life event immediately can turn into a financial crisis for you, which is just not fun. And bills still are going to arrive, rent's going to need to be paid, and decisions start getting made under pressure. Usually when you're under pressure, you make worse decisions. So with a nice little financial buffer, emergency fund, those situations look very different because now you have that buffer to give yourself time. You can have time to look for a new job without rushing, to the first option available, time to adjust your spending if needed, and time to just take a step back, think about what your next step is going to be and not reacting out of panic. And for people in their 20s, building that buffer, it definitely does not need to happen all at once. It's usually something that grows gradually over time as you consistently save and set aside a portion of your income. Even a few months of expenses saved up can make a huge difference in how stable your finances feel. I mean, I'm telling you, even having $1,000 in a savings account can give you a lot of financial breathing room. And some of the best value from this is not even financial, but it's psychological. Knowing that you have a cushion behind you just makes it much easier to navigate, downturns or recessions without really constantly worrying about what's going to happen next to yourself. Another super important step of preparation for a recession is protecting your income, right? A lot of people know the stock market's going to go up, it's going to go down during a recession. But what really affects you financially is day to day how much money is coming into your actual bank account. And as we know, when the economy slows, companies become a lot more cautious. Hiring is going to slow down, unemployment's going to go up, budgets are going to tighten, and worst case, people are going to get laid off and sometimes even mass layoffs. And the problem is, even people who are really good at their jobs, they can feel the effects from this. Just because you're a really good employee does not necessarily protect you all the time from a layoff, especially if your company or industry hits a rough patch financially. Now, this doesn't mean you suddenly need to become the best person in your industry overnight, but one thing that does help is consistently improving your skills and understanding your role as deep as possible so you can make a difference to your company over time. Another aspect of protecting your income is simply staying aware of how stable your industry or company might be during a downturn. Some industries tend to hold up a lot better when the economy slows. Others are a lot more sensitive to economic cycles, so paying attention to those certain patterns can help you think more strategically about where you want to position yourself in your career. And for most people in their 20s, this is also a good time to experiment with building skills that create optionality in your life. So that might be, learning something new within your current job or developing skills that are valuable across multiple different industries. Or it could even just be simply staying curious about potential opportunities that exist outside your current role. Just because you have a good job doesn't mean you can't look for other jobs. And once again, the goal of all of this is not to panic about job security, right? You should not be stressing yourself out that you're going to lose your job. It's just to slowly build a skill set that keeps you adaptable. And if worst case you were to get laid off, you have skills that any company would be happy to hire you with. Because when the economy becomes uncertain, adaptability becomes one of the most valuable assets you can have, especially in your 20s. Another great way to prepare yourself for a recession in your 20s is you have to try as hard as you can to avoid any financial commitments that make your life fragile. When the economy is doing well and your income feels stable, it's very easy to stretch your budget a little further than you probably should. Maybe you move into a more expensive apartment because the payment technically fits your income. Maybe you finance a newer car because the monthly payments seem manageable. You always wanted a new car, X, Y, and Z. Or maybe you start adding small reoccurring expenses, right? You add a few more subscriptions, services, conveniences. You start going out to eat a little bit more. And that slowly increases the amount of money that leaves your bank account each month. And obviously, this is no, rocket science here. We all know this. The more money you spend, the more money leaves your account. But if you know a potential financial crisis or economic downturn is on the horizon, now's the time to get ahead of it. None of those decisions are going to feel irresponsible in the moment while the economy is doing good. In fact, a lot of times they actually feel like progress. Like you feel like you're leveling your life up. You're making more money, your lifestyle improves a little, and everything you got everything under control. The problem is some of those commitments assume that your income's always going to stay the same and your expenses are never going to increase. But when a recession hits, that assumption can suddenly, be out of the picture. If your income drops or becomes uncertain, those fixed expenses, they're not going to shrink along with it. We know companies aren't going to be like, oh, we're going to lower our subscription costs because we're in a recession. No, they're going to keep their prices the same. That's why flexibility is such an underrated part of your financial stability in your 20s. When your expenses are reasonable and very manageable, you have so much room to adjust if your circumstances change. You can cut back on spending, you can reduce certain costs, and you can just write out difficult periods without feeling completely trapped. That's kind of what I mentioned in the disclaimer in the beginning of this video. If you are in a good financial position, truthfully, you really shouldn't do anything different than what you're doing now other than turn off the news. But when most of your income is already tied up and it's locked into these fixed commitments, even small little disruptions can feel way too overwhelming and way too stress-inducing. So avoiding financial commitments doesn't mean you have to live extremely frugally. Like if you saw my expenses, I'm not a very frugal person. I also don't avoid enjoying my life. It just means you need to just be a little bit more mindful of how much your future income is already promised to go to all these different expenses. Because once again, the more flexibility that you have to maintain your lifestyle, the easier it becomes to navigate these kind of uncertain periods of time when we don't really know what's going to happen, but we're all kind of feeling this financial pressure. Now, I know it'd be easy for me to just come here and say, oh, you just need to start 3 side hustles and work on, 2 different jobs and start a YouTube channel and start making extra money. But realistically, we know it's not that easy, right? Another thing that you also need to do during a downturn is, and this is probably one of the hardest things to do, especially during an economic recession, especially if you're new to investing, is you just got to, enjoy the money you have now, but if you are investing, continue to invest even when everything around you is going to tell you not to or everything feels negative. When markets start dropping, those headlines are going to be everywhere. Every news outlet is going to talk about financial uncertainty, layoffs, economic slowdowns, the S&P's down, and social media is going to fill up with all these predictions about how much worse things are going to get, and we're not going to have food in the next 3 days, and all this stuff. And when you see your investment account going down at the same time, it's very easy to get overwhelmed, and once again, you start making these panicky decisions. But when you zoom out and you think about investing over decades rather than months, those periods of lower prices often end up being the most important parts of your long-term growth, financial story. So for someone in their 20s, time is definitely one of the biggest advantages you can have as an investor. You're not relying on your investments for income right now, unless you are, but I'm not. And you likely have decades ahead of you before retirement becomes even relevant. So because of that, downturns are usually less about protecting what you have and more about continuing to build your finances. So far in this video, I've talked about if you're young enough and you're in your 20s, you should probably just turn the news off and keep investing. But if you truly want to prepare, you need to know your numbers, you need to avoid big financial commitments, you need to build yourself that buffer, you need to protect your income. But one thing that I really think is worth mentioning, and I don't see talked about a lot, especially when a recession is on the horizon or something like that, and this isn't necessarily connected to finances right away, but you need to focus on your overall health and stability. And when the economy gets shaky, stress is going to tend to increase across the board. It usually doesn't matter your age, doesn't matter where you came from, doesn't matter what you look like, doesn't matter what you believe. More than likely, if people are talking about a recession, people are going to freak out and stress is going to increase. And people are going to start worrying about their jobs, their investments, and whether their future will be as stable as they hoped. And the problem is, if if you're consistently consuming negative headlines or content about the economy, it's easy for that anxiety to build up over time. I feel like a lot of people on social media tend to fearmonger and tend to just say so many negative things about what can happen in your life, right? And what happens is those people or that type of content and negativity tend to make people make bad financial decisions. They're going to panic sell investments. They're going to make rushed financial decisions. And worst case, they're going to start reacting emotionally instead of thinking long term. That's why, in my opinion, maintaining stability in your day-to-day life is one of the most underrated parts of financial resilience. Keeping a consistent routine, taking care of your physical health, and just maintaining good habits that keep you grounded and keep you focused can make a huge difference in how you handle uncertainty in your life. And when your life has some decent structure, right? Like, I'm not telling you need to be like David Goggins, but when your life has some good structure and balance, you're much more likely to stay calm when the markets are volatile or when the news or social media becomes very negative. At the end of the day, economic cycles will come and go. Markets are going to go up, they're going to go down. But the ability to stay disciplined and think clearly through those cycles is what's ultimately going to allow people to keep building over the long run. And it's what's really going to set you apart from the majority of people out there. So taking care of yourself might not sound like traditional financial advice, but in many ways, it's what allows you to stick to the habits that are truly actually going to build wealth over time and set you up for your future. So to wrap this video up, at the end of the day, preparing for a recession in your 20s really isn't about trying to predict exactly what the economy is going to do next, right? No one has that kind of foresight, and most people who claim they know what's going to happen are probably just trying to get views or get traction on social media. What you can control is how resilient you are in your financial life when uncertainty shows up. And while everyone has a different financial outlook and everyone's going to have different income and expenses and stuff like that, I think for the majority of people, if you understand your numbers, have some savings set aside, continue building valuable skills, avoid locking yourself into financial commitments, and just stay consistent with your investing habits, you're already doing most of the things that actually matter and that are actually going to set you ahead. And if you're in your 20s, the biggest advantage you have will always be time. We're so young while we're in our 20s. I know it doesn't seem like it, but we have so much time to let our investments grow and to get out of financial recessions and stuff like that. So while recessions are going to feel dramatic when you're living through them, people who benefit the most from that long time horizon aren't the ones who panic and try to outsmart every cycle. They're the ones who literally just keep doing what they're doing. Stay steady, dollar cost average, and keep building through it. So if the economy starts to look uncertain, the goal will never be to panic or make drastic moves. Look, in my opinion, the goal is just to simply make sure your foundation is strong enough to handle whatever comes next. So if you found this helpful, let me know in the comments how you're thinking about preparing financially right now, what you're investing in, what you're doing to put yourself ahead. Other than that, I appreciate you guys for watching this video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.